Hey everybody, it's the History Teacher. In this episode, let's look at the Tudor kings and queens of England. The beginning of Tudor rule in England marked the end of the Wars of the Roses, the dynastic struggle between branches of the English royal family that had persisted for 30 years. The first Tudor king was Henry VII, who captured the throne in 1485 by defeating King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth, during which Richard was killed. As a usurper, Henry was compelled to take steps to ensure that he, in turn, was not overthrown. Those steps included threatening nobles with financial ruin if they were disloyal, and distributing land and titles to obedient subjects. Henry's reign began with his brave victory in battle, which liberated England from the rule of a suspected child murderer, Richard III. But, by the time his reign ended, Henry was perceived as something akin to merely a miserly, greedy landlord. There were several rebellions against Henry's rule. However, Henry's measures to retain power were successful enough that, on his death in 1509, the throne passed to his son, who was crowned Henry VIII. Henry VIII was the epitome of a Renaissance prince. Learned, multilingual, physically fit, and handsome, Henry VIII was only 18 when he was crowned, and his youth, vigor, and confidence were a refreshing change from his father's reclusiveness and paranoia. The new king spent money lavishly on palaces, on grand feasts, and on his wardrobe. Henry was determined to advertise his kingdom's power by flaunting its wealth. Henry intended that England should be considered a great power on the European stage. Still, like with royalty throughout the world, Henry's most pressing goal was to produce an heir to perpetuate the Tudor dynasty. In that era, such meant having a legitimate son. Famously, Henry married 6 women in the pursuit of securing his dynasty. In the process, he would send 2 of his wives to the chopping block. These marriages resulted in 2 daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, and 1 son, Edward. The woman who gave Henry a son, his third wife Jane Seymour, died shortly after childbirth. Henry's efforts to have another son in case something happened to Edward were not successful. Nevertheless, through means both extraordinary and violent, Henry finally had an heir. Henry's quest for a son not only resulted in royal ex-wives, dead and alive, but also in the end of a 1,000-year tradition of the Catholic Church in England. The Church, controlled in Rome, failed to grant Henry's request to end his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. Henry was persuaded by his advisors to separate England from the Church and, instead, to establish a new Church of England with the king as its head. That was the initial phase of what became the English Reformation, which permanently changed England from Catholic to Protestant. A remarkable transformation, given that years before, the Pope had granted the title Defender of the Faith to Henry for his attacks against the early Protestants in Europe. Henry's son became Edward VI upon his father's death in 1547. Edward was king from the ages of 9 to 15. But, precocious, intelligent, and a committed Protestant, Edward accelerated England's break from the Roman Church and cemented Protestantism within his realm. When Edward knew he was dying, he attempted to prevent his Catholic half-sister Mary from succeeding him to the throne, anxious that she would try to restore Catholicism. Edward designated his Protestant cousin, 15-year-old Lady Jane Grey, as the next monarch. At Edward's death, Lady Jane was proclaimed queen. But Princess Mary was widely considered the legitimate heir and, with little resistance, managed to imprison Lady Jane, and Mary had herself crowned Queen of England. Mary did indeed attempt to reverse the English Reformation. She ordered prominent Protestants burned at the stake, and for such measures earned the moniker Bloody Mary. However, Mary's rule was short, only 5 years, and she had no heirs to continue her mission. So when she died of illness in 1558 and her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth took over, Mary's cause of restoring Catholicism was effectively over. The second half of the 16th century in Europe is often called the Elizabethan era, which suggests the prominence of Queen Elizabeth in that time. Elizabeth presided over a kingdom which included Shakespeare, John Donne, and Edmund Spenser. With its defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 and establishment of colonies in the New World, England also emerged as a world power during this time. Queen Elizabeth was highly educated and politically astute. During her long reign, she exhibited charm, courage, as well as cruelty. By choosing never to marry, she guaranteed that she would never have to share her power with a husband. But another consequence was that, when she died without an heir in 1603, the Tudor dynasty was over. Her cousin, James Stuart, King of Scotland, would succeed to the English throne. During their 118-year tenure, Tudor kings and queens transformed England from a kingdom fractured by decades of war into a proud, self-aware nation whose culture was blossoming and whose power was expanding beyond the horizon. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.